Let's get straight to it. When someone calls you Machiavellian, is it an insult, a compliment, or something in between? The word carries this sharp, almost dangerous edge to it. It makes you think of manipulation, cunning, and cold-blooded strategy. But what if I told you that most people get it completely wrong? What if Machiavellian doesn't just mean being ruthless, it means understanding power, influence, and the deep, often hidden, rules that control human behavior? To truly understand what Machiavellian means, we need to meet Niccolò Machiavelli, the man behind the word. Picture this Renaissance Italy, a chaotic patchwork of city-states, each one fighting to stay alive in a world of war, betrayal, and shifting alliances. It was a world where leaders could rise to glory or be executed in the blink of an eye. Machiavelli wasn't a king, a general, or a noble. He was an observer, a sharp-eyed political advisor who lived through this turbulence and wanted to figure out how power really worked. And that's where his book, The Prince, comes in. This wasn't your typical how to be a good leader guide. Machiavelli didn't care about moral ideals or what people should do. He cared about results. What does it actually take to keep power? How do you win in a world where everyone else is trying to knock you down? These were the questions he answered with brutal honesty. Let's take one of his most famous ideas: it's better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Harsh, right? But think about it. If you were in charge of a team, a country, even just a group of friends, would you want people to love you so much that they take advantage of your kindness? Or would you want them to respect you, even fear disappointing you, so they stay loyal and focused? Machiavelli wasn't saying love is useless, he was saying fear is more reliable. Love can fade, fear sticks.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
But here's where it gets deeper. Machiavelli wasn't just about being ruthless. He believed that being feared doesn't mean being hated. A good leader avoids cruelty that creates resentment. Instead, they use fear strategically to maintain order and protect what matters most. And if you think about it, isn't this something we all navigate in life? Where do you draw the line between being nice and being taken seriously? Now let's talk about manipulation, because this is where people often misinterpret Machiavelli. He didn't say lying and scheming were good for their own sake. He said they were tools that could be used when the stakes were high enough. Imagine you're in a situation where being honest will get you crushed. Would you stick to your principles, or would you adapt to survive? That's the Machiavellian mindset, understanding when to play by the rules and when to break them. But here's where things get really tricky. Machiavelli wasn't just writing for princes and kings. His insights apply to everyone, from politicians to business leaders to regular people trying to navigate relationships and careers. In The Prince, he talks about the importance of appearing virtuous while doing whatever it takes behind the scenes. Does that sound dishonest? Maybe. But think about your own life. How often do you present one version of yourself to the world while keeping your true thoughts hidden? Is that being fake or just being smart? Machiavelli also had a deep understanding of timing. He believed that fortune, the unpredictable twists of fate, plays a massive role in success. But he also believed that a wise person knows how to seize opportunities when they appear. In his view, fortune was like a river. When it's calm, you build dams and prepare for floods. When it's raging, you adapt, change course, and make sure you're not swept away. Ask yourself, how often do you wait for the perfect moment, only to realize too late that the moment passed you by? Here's the thing about Machiavelli that people miss: he wasn't promoting evil for the sake of evil. He was promoting realism. He was saying, this is how the world works. You can either understand it and play the game or pretend it's different and lose. And that's why his ideas are still so powerful today. We live in a world of competition, from boardrooms to politics to social media. Knowing how to read people, how to act strategically, and how to protect yourself isn't just useful, it's necessary. But let me leave you with this thought: is being Machiavellian always the right approach? Or does it cost something like trust, connection, or even your sense of self? If you're always calculating, always thinking 5 moves ahead, do you lose the ability to just be human? That's the question Machiavelli doesn't answer, but it's one we all need to face. Let's go deeper. Why is it that Niccolò Machiavelli's ideas still resonate in a world so different from his own? We're no longer living in Renaissance Italy, with its endless assassinations and shifting alliances, at least, not in the same way. But Machiavelli wasn't writing about the quirks of his time, he was writing about human nature. And if there's one thing that hasn't changed, it's how people think, feel, and act when power is on the line. Think about influence for a second. Whether you're negotiating a raise, leading a team, or just trying to get through a tough conversation, you're engaging in a power dynamic. Machiavelli understood that power isn't just about brute strength or authority, it's about perception. He wrote that a leader should appear to be virtuous, even if they aren't. Why? Because people judge you based on what they see, not what's real. Here's the twist: Machiavelli wasn't saying that virtues like honesty or kindness are useless. He was saying they're tools. If you truly embody them, great. But if the situation demands it, you might need to seem like you do, even if your actions say otherwise. For example, have you ever acted calm in a crisis to reassure others, even when you felt panicked inside? That's Machiavellian. It's not about deception, it's about managing how others perceive you so you can lead effectively. But Machiavelli also understood something most people ignore: trust isn't given freely. It's earned or manipulated. He believed that a smart leader doesn't just wait for loyalty to form, they create conditions where loyalty is the best option for their followers. Think about how this plays out in your own life. If you're leading a project at work, do people support you because they trust your vision, or because they know they'll benefit if they stay on your side? Machiavelli would argue it doesn't matter, as long as the result is the same. Now, let's talk about fear again. People often associate Machiavellianism with being intimidating or cruel, but he was more subtle than that. He wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. But here's the nuance: he believed that fear should never turn into hatred. Why? Because hatred leads to rebellion, and rebellion leads to your downfall. A smart leader maintains control without pushing people so far that they feel desperate to fight back. It's a balancing act, and one that applies not just to rulers, but to anyone who holds influence. For example, think about a boss you've had. The ones who were respected but firm probably got more from their teams than the ones who ruled with an iron fist. Why? Because they understood that leadership is about more than commands, it's about creating an environment where people feel compelled to follow, not forced to. That's Machiavelli's influence in action. But there's a darker side to this. Machiavelli knew that people are not always good. He saw firsthand how easily greed, fear, and ambition drive human behavior. And he wrote that if you want to succeed, you can't rely on people to act in your best interest. You have to assume they'll act in theirs. Is that cynical? Maybe. But is it wrong? Look around. How often do people prioritize their goals over what's right or fair? This brings us to one of Machiavelli's most controversial ideas: the ends justify the means. It's one of those phrases people throw around without fully understanding it. Machiavelli wasn't saying that anything goes or that morality doesn't matter. He was saying that when the stakes are high enough, when survival or success is on the line, you can't afford to be constrained by traditional notions of right and wrong. If a lie, a betrayal, or a calculated risk is what it takes to achieve your goal, then so be it. But here's the catch: you have to be prepared to live with the consequences. Machiavelli understood that power is fragile. Every action you take, every choice you make, either strengthens or weakens your position. That's why he emphasized the importance of strategy. Being Machiavellian isn't about being reckless or cruel, it's about thinking several moves ahead, like a chess player who sees the whole board. And let's be real, this applies to all of us. Think about the times you've had to make a tough decision. Maybe you told a white lie to avoid conflict. Maybe you held back the full truth because revealing it would cause more harm than good. Were those choices wrong? Or were they necessary? That's the gray area Machiavelli lived in. It's not about being good or bad, it's about being effective. But effectiveness has its limits. If you're always scheming, always calculating, you risk losing something essential: trust, connection, and the ability to act authentically. Machiavelli might argue that's the price of power, but is it a price worth paying? That's the question he forces us to wrestle with, even if he doesn't provide an easy answer. Before we move to the next part, consider this: if you had to choose between being loved and being feared, what would you pick? And if you chose fear, how would you make sure it didn't turn into resentment? That's the real challenge of influence, and one that Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. Let's take everything we've discussed and apply it to the real world. Being Machiavellian doesn't mean you're scheming in some dark corner, plotting everyone's downfall. It means understanding how power works, how people think, and how to navigate a world that doesn't always reward honesty or fairness. But here's the thing: living with a Machiavellian mindset isn't just about strategy. It's about making tough choices that blur the lines between right and wrong. Let's start with relationships. Personal, professional, or even casual, every relationship has an element of power. It's not necessarily sinister, it's just how human dynamics work. Machiavelli's insight was that people often act in their own self-interest, even when they seem altruistic. So the question isn't whether you should trust people, it's how much trust you should give and in what circumstances. For example, imagine someone at work who's always agreeable, always supportive, but rarely puts their own reputation on the line. Are they truly reliable, or are they positioning themselves to stay safe while letting you take the risks? Machiavelli would tell you to pay attention, not just to what people say, but to what they do. He believed that understanding someone's true intentions often means looking beyond their words to their actions. But this brings up a deeper question: how far should you go in protecting yourself? If you're constantly reading between the lines, constantly second-guessing people's motives, do you risk becoming paranoid? Machiavelli might argue that a little paranoia is a small price to pay for survival, but there's a limit. If you're always expecting betrayal, you might push people away, people who could have been allies if you just trusted them a little more. So where's the balance? That's the challenge. Now, let's talk about ambition. Machiavelli was clear about one thing: success doesn't come to those who wait for it. He believed that fortune luck favors the bold, but not the reckless. He used the metaphor of fortune as a woman, saying she favors those who are audacious enough to take control but not so impulsive that they act without thinking. What does that mean for you? It means waiting for the perfect moment is often just an excuse for inaction. If you want something, whether it's a promotion, a relationship, or a new opportunity, you have to take calculated risks. But calculated is the key word. Machiavelli wasn't about gambling everything on a whim. He believed in preparation, understanding the situation, knowing your strengths, and anticipating how others might react. If you act without thinking, you're not being Machiavellian, you're just being careless. And carelessness is one of the fastest ways to lose power, trust, or respect. Here's another angle that often gets overlooked. Machiavelli didn't believe in unnecessary cruelty. He argued that when force or manipulation is required, it should be swift, decisive, and as minimal as possible. Prolonged cruelty creates resentment, and resentment creates enemies. The same applies in everyday life. If you have to make a tough decision, firing someone, ending a relationship, or confronting a friend, you don't drag it out. You're clear, you're firm, and you don't leave room for unnecessary pain. It's not about being cold, it's about being effective. But here's where it gets complicated. Machiavelli also believed that morality is often a luxury afforded by those who already have power. For everyone else, the choices are harder. Do you stick to your principles and risk losing everything? Or do you bend the rules to protect yourself and your goals? It's easy to say you'd always choose the moral high ground, but what happens when the stakes are real? When it's your livelihood, your family, or your dreams on the line? This is where Machiavelli's ideas challenge us. They don't just explain the world, they force us to confront our own limits. How far are you willing to go to achieve your goals? Are you prepared to manipulate, to bend the truth, to play a version of yourself that's more strategic than sincere? And if you are, what does that do to your sense of who you are? Machiavelli wasn't interested in easy answers, and neither should we be. He understood that life is messy, that people are unpredictable, and that morality doesn't always align with survival. But he also believed in clarity. He believed that the first step to mastering power and life is to see things as they really are, not as we wish they were. That's why his ideas still resonate. They force us to stop pretending the world is fair and start thinking about how to navigate it effectively. So, what does it mean to be Machiavellian in today's world? It means understanding that power dynamics exist everywhere, from boardrooms to friendships. It means being strategic about when to trust, when to act, and when to take a step back. But it also means knowing where to draw the line. Because if you're always calculating, always playing the game, you risk losing the very thing that makes life meaningful: connection, authenticity, and a sense of purpose beyond power. Let's leave it with this. If you had the ability to achieve everything you've ever wanted, but only by playing the game as Machiavelli described, would you do it? And if not, what are you willing to sacrifice to stay true to your principles? Because at the end of the day, that's the real challenge of being Machiavellian, not just understanding power, but deciding how much of it you actually want.